This is Other Voices. We're listening to varied views from local people who might otherwise not be heard. I'm Melissa Hale Spencer, editor of the Altamont Enterprise, which focuses on Albany County, New York. I'm talking to Alice Green. As the founder and executive director of the Center for Law and Justice in Albany, she understands that structural racism affects not just our criminal justice system, but everything from our schools to our healthcare system. 7 years ago, Green wrote a paper, Pathway to Change. In it, she details the decades of racial tensions between the Albany Police Department and the community it serves. She continues to work for change, and currently the center's website features responses from Albany leaders to the center's recommendations. Is there anything valuable you think we can learn as a society from the kind of uproar that we've been seeing here in Albany and all around the country? What is it telling us?
Yeah, certainly the incident that happened in Minneapolis with the killing of George Floyd is an image that I think has grasped the attention and the feelings of people around the world. And we see people in England and other countries looking at that and saying, what are we doing to each other? This is something terrible that should not happen. African Americans have been experiencing this for a very long time. Police relations got started in a very negative way during the period of enslavement, and police were used to control and dehumanize black people. And it's happened throughout the ages, through even the Reconstruction period, the Jim Crow era, the Civil Rights Movement, the new Jim Crow era. And some are asking, have we come very far at all in terms of providing justice and equity to people of color? So I think people are starting to ask that question as a result of this image of George Floyd being, the life being choked out of him. It's come to symbolize what African Americans have felt and the way they've been treated throughout the years. The whole symbol of having a knee put in a place that chokes off the very life and the air and very life of someone is amazingly touching to so many people. So I think the first thing is caused us to really think, to feel about other people and what policing and unequal treatment really means in very graphic terms. So I think that's very, very positive. The thing that happened this Saturday, I was there at the evening demonstration when things went bad, but I think people have to understand why some people reacted and responded the way they did. Some people call it rioting. From our perspective, it's not. It's actually it was an uprising because people went beyond what had happened in Minnesota. They went beyond that, and they connected and understood what it meant to be one of the groups in this country that has suffered so much. And so people there at that demonstration, really, some of them felt that they had to do some other things than what we would have liked them to have done. Certainly we don't condone violence, but what they were saying is we need to be heard. And so often they've not been heard. And so I think it went beyond, as I said, what happened in Minneapolis. For them, It was an opportunity to be heard, to express their anger, their distrust, you know, and so we need to hear that. And if we hear that, it will allow us as a community to start thinking about how do we treat people differently? How do we get beyond white supremacy? How do we get to understand and deal with systemic racism that's present in all of our institutions, not only the criminal justice system, but education, in public schools in some of our cities. They get far less money to support the schools than they do in others. Some schools are wealthier, much wealthier than others. They're able to afford and supplies for young people. There's inequities in the health care, and I think the virus has shown us what happens when people do not have access to good health care. They're much more vulnerable and much more likely to be harmed by something like a virus. So, so we have to look at employment as another area, great inequity. So it's forcing us to look at what's going on in our society differently. And the Center for Law and Justice is really pushing for community local officials to help get that message across and to be actively involved in learning more about systemic racism and acting to reduce it in all of those institutions. So, but as I said, our focus has been on criminal justice at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I looked up a report that you produced in 2013, and it was just after Florida jury had acquitted George Zimmerman from having murdered Trayvon Martin.
Right.
And, that seemed too like it was going to be a turning point in the nation. That seemed too like, how could that be? And this report I just found remarkable because of the way it resonates today. But here it is 7 years later. You went all the way back in this report, as you well know, to a killing I hadn't been aware of in Albany that you thought was kind of the start of this seed of distrust, and then built it out forward with these recommendations, just as you're saying now, that locally could make a difference. And I'm just wondering if those recommendations still hold, or if you tried them and they failed, and what could be done differently this time with things like community policing or, some of those other initiatives that you recommended 7 years ago.
Right. Well, that was our 2013 report, but we did a report in 2019.
Okay. I didn't get that one. What was, this was the survey of people?
Yeah, we did a survey.
Yeah.
In Albany, and trying to find out from people how they felt about the police department, and the district attorney's office, law enforcement in general, and trying to see what they thought the core of the problem was. Mm-hmm. And it was, for them, it was racism. And we're talking about not personal individual racism, but how a system is constructed so that it operates to disadvantage and treat certain people differently. And we see that very clearly in the criminal justice system. Blacks are more likely to be arrested. They're more likely to be prosecuted. They're more likely to be incarcerated. All and based on stereotypes, oftentimes. Mm-hmm. In our society, we have come to believe that blacks are inherently criminal, that they are violent, and that's a stereotype. And so people get treated according to that stereotype, within the criminal justice system. So, and there are many, many examples of what systemic racism looks like, but I don't think people understand that. They're so used to thinking about racism as being an individual act, calling someone a name or an individual discrimination against someone. Those might be horrible things, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about institutions that operate in a way that treats certain people differently, and so that's what we're trying to. So with the report we did last year, which was based on the survey, and when we asked people how they felt, there were three major findings that we came away with. One was that the community did distrust its police department. They did distrust the district attorney. They were angered and continue to be angry about police brutality that took place. These are specific incidents that took place on First Street in Albany, where police came in, knocked someone's door down, beat them, took them out and beat them. It was on camcorder. It was recorded. And then the other thing was the shooting of Elazar Williams, the young man, 19-year-old young man who was shot in the back by a police detective in the Albany Police Department. And Elazar Williams is paralyzed. So the community was outraged by that. And so we took that information. There were other findings in the report, but we took that information. We made sure that our key officials had that information, had the report, and wanted them to respond. But it also included recommendations of things that we could do to make some change in our community. For instance, we've requested that the department becomes more transparent. That we need to know what's going on in our police department. We need to know the police officers who have all these complaints lodged against them. Just as it was in Minnesota, the man who killed George Floyd had 18 complaints against him for brutality and other offenses. But the community did not know that because we don't give out that information. So what the center did was recommend that in New York State, where 50A, the civil rights law 50A, basically protects that information from the public. And so, we wanted to get information we wanted to see camcorders recordings, which we help develop those policies. And when something happens, I want to have access to those videos so I know what happened. And that's the way we thought it was going to happen, but it's not happening that way. So those are some like the transparency things. But we had I think about 19 recommendations for change. The powers that be did dismiss our report to a great extent because obviously they didn't want to deal with those issues that we were proposing. So really frustrated by that and unable to get the chief and the mayor and the district attorney and others to really talk about that distrust. So we were surprised with what happened on Saturday here in Albany. So, but anyways, what we did was to do a second report. All of these are on my website, by the way, cflj.org. Mm-hmm. The second report basically asked four key leaders, the chief, the district attorney, the mayor, and head of the Common Council, to respond to a series of questions. We wanted to know what their thinking was, what their feelings were about certain issues. And so we've been giving them a list of questions every other week and getting them to respond and then publishing those responses so the public can see, what they're thinking about, what they're not willing to do. Like we ask for things like policies. What is your use of force policy. Unfortunately, we did get the policy, but a lot of it was redacted, and so we don't know why. So that's another problem. But the point is, we've been asking them consistently to give us their thoughts and their policies, on certain issues. We've asked for them to do a racial impact statement on certain policies. So those are the kind of things we were doing. So what we were doing all this so that we collect this data over a year's period, and after this summer, we will present in the fall a symposium designed to look at, define structural racism. What is it? How do we know what it is? What can we do about it? And also community policing. The department still claims that it does community policing and does it better than it ever has. We don't believe that. So we've got to talk about those kinds of things and come up with some solid recommendations and plan of action so that we can start dealing with the structural racism that we see, particularly in our law enforcement system. So that's sort of where we're at. We have a number, as I said, we have a number of recommendations. We were really interested to see that Governor Cuomo presented some possible plan of action, and I just want to note that I think some of the things he said, I don't know how many he put down, but anyway, those are part of our recommendations. We had asked for those very things. We asked for, changes in Civil Rights Law 50A, which allows police to keep secret the disciplinary records of police officers. We're saying they shouldn't do that. It's an issue of transparency. There also, the governor said that that the police department and also the DA's office really can't police themselves. Police departments can't police themselves, and the district attorney probably should not be handling certain cases around use of force and representing a client and someone who is charged with a crime at the same time. That's a real conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. So the governor said, and the governor also keeps talking about, and he's done it for the last several days, talked about the systemic racism. He's saying that that's one of the problems that we see with the virus, is that people of color especially have not had access to good services like healthcare, and that's why they're more vulnerable to the virus. So he keeps talking about systemic racism, and he's also talking about we should develop a national standard of use of force. How much force is too much, and is it dangerous and damaging to use certain kinds of restraining paraphernalia or actions. And so we're going to be looking at that a little closer. We work with the Albany Medical College. We're going to try to get them to help us with that particular project, to look at the kinds of things that police departments do. Do you put your knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes? Do you do chokeholds? And when people say, I can't breathe, do you continue? Because some of their policies say that as long as a person is talking, their life is not in danger. But obviously it can be. We just seen that happen. So there are all of these kinds of things that the governor is calling for change, but he's calling for some of the same things that we have already called for in our report.
So it interests me that you said you were surprised by what happened on Saturday. Why did that surprise you?
I wasn't surprised.
Oh, I thought
I'm saying that the mayor and the police chief expressed surprise.
Oh, yes, indeed, they did. Yes, they certainly did. And they also claimed that they were doing community policing. So I'd love to hear from you. What is real community policing? What would be different? What would be better?
Yeah. Well, what we've done, and we've been working on this issue for a long time. By the way, the center this is our 35th year of operation, so we've been through everything.
Yeah.
And so we've always taken a position that community policing refers to the development of collaborative working relationship between the community and the police department. The police department is seen as an integral part of the community. And from that position, we identify problems in the community, and we work on developing solutions to those problems so that the whole community is safe. So it's not the police working on their own, developing policies I don't know about. It's really that equal partnership that we're talking about. I take the position that that's my department, that's my police department. I pay taxes, it's my police department. And I want to make sure it functions as well as it can to protect me and my community. So we start from that particular perspective, and then we try to, so if you come from that perspective, transparency is something that has to happen because it's my department. I want to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. So when you don't give me information that I've asked you for, when you don't give me the body cam footage that I'm looking to look at, that I want to see and make some decisions about, when you don't tell me that you got police officers who've been disciplined 18 times and they're walking the streets in my community, I want to know that. Mm-hmm. So we start from that, perspective that we need to be doing this together. I need to have some control over my police department, and so the police department should not be seen as the highest authority in the land. It's our department. We work together on it. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about community policing. So we're going to try to make sure that we are able to pull all of this together that I've been talking about, all the responses that we get from officials. We're asking community people to comment on what each of these people is saying, and feel free to disagree or agree or come up with other kinds of solutions. So we're reporting people to our website so they can go in and they can see how each one of those officials responded to certain questions that we posed to them.
Well, one of the things I noticed in both the county and the city press conference yesterday was they drew a distinction between the protests in the afternoon and what happened at nighttime, and were even alleging the Sheriff Apple as well as Police Chief Hawkins that what they called the rioting, and I understand that you don't, was caused by outsiders. It wouldn't be from Albany. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, see, I don't think they know that. I was that was one thing that really bothered me a lot, was the police chief who had said a couple of days earlier that the relationship between the community and the police department is excellent, and that they're experiencing a really strong relationship, and he is the one who dismissed the center's study, the survey. He based his information on anecdotes, and he wouldn't even elaborate on that. I mean, did he hear from one person, two people? We don't know. But, he dismissed our survey, which had 250 responses that, in terms of questionnaire with lots of questions. So we had a better sense of what the community was feeling. But that's another way of dismissing the reality of structural racism, the existence of structural racism. Because if what he was saying was, people in the community are happy. They're not going to cause any problems and protest against the police because they're happy. It had to come from somewhere else. Now, I'm sure there were people who were not part of the Albany community that was there. It was a march to gather all people together and with many of them starting out protesting what had happened in Minneapolis. But many of the people who were there in the late afternoon and evening were people from the community. And I mean, I was there, and people were saying things like, I'm really angry with my police department here, and I'm afraid of them, and they were identifying with terrible things with some or relating some of the terrible experiences that they had had or someone in their family had from police officers. So it as I said, I'm sure there were some people from outside, but that was not the issue. The issue was that there were lots of people from the community who were voicing opposition to the way they're treated by the police department. And the chief wasn't there.
Right.
I was there, but the chief was not there. The mayor was not there. So they can't tell me about, that they're relying their whole... they're relying on anecdotal data from somewhere that I don't know where they got it from. But I think that's just another way to escape talking about systemic racism, structural racism, because you change the subject. And we want them to stay focused on what we're doing in terms of trying to get the community to understand and be involved in efforts to reduce the systemic and structural racism.
So when you were there, tell me what that was like. I mean, you were in the midst of people that you probably knew. What did it feel like? Were you feeling angry yourself? Were you, how did it feel?
Well, yeah, I think most people, well, I shouldn't say most, but I think many people who witnessed the video of George Floyd being, the life being taken out of him, were angry. I mean, I was angry.
Yeah.
But people who are angry, show their anger in different ways. Some people have more control over it. Others don't know how to. Others have had different kinds of experiences, and they feel that they have to explode. There are people who, after a while, feel totally powerless and have no hope left in them that change is going to come. They react differently, and I'm not saying that I condone violence, but I understand it. And we should understand what that violence means, and not to just say it was a violent event or somebody did something that they should be prosecuted for and all of that. That's not really addressing the real issue.
So what does the violence mean? What does it mean? I mean, I watched that video too. I'm a white person and I just felt sick, but I felt guilty because, if you're born white, you feel like you're part of the problem. But what does the violence mean and what should we do?
Well, first of all, we should understand that America has a very long history of violence. And I'm not talking about poor people or people of color. we have to understand that violence has been used in this country so long and used against people of color, starting with in periods of enslavement, right straight on through. We've experienced, Ku Klux Klan and police violence and all kinds of things have happened to black people because of white supremacy and white people being in control and in power. Whiteness is a capital. I mean, it's something that gets you what you want and need, and so you might see the world very different. You want to hold on to that power. You want to hold on to that position of superiority that you think you have. So violence is not new. This country, the Wild West was violence. So violence has been with us, and it'll probably be with us for a long period of time. So all of a sudden, we're making this moral decision that people who react to what is frightening and fearful for them by lashing out as something new and horrible. And I'm not, I'm saying I don't like to see people hurt. I don't like to see people lose their property. But I also understand that people experience life very differently, and certainly poor people, people of color, experience life very differently. And when you have no sense of hope, you're not part of that system. You don't see yourself as being part of that system. You have no power. You if you tomorrow woke up and were different, you'd probably respond to what you see and what you feel very differently.
No, I do. I believe you. And you've mentioned that word hope again. And I'd just like to explore that, because one of the things I thought was so powerful in this 2013 paper, after the Martin incident, death, you said in this meeting, you described it on a hot night in the library, and you said that there was a sense of hope in the room, which surprised me, that people were going to perhaps try to change things and work together. And that's why I felt so kind of depressed reading it, because,
yeah, right.
What gives people hope? What makes us change? Because we have changed some things as a society in terms of like gay and lesbian rights, or
right. There have been changes. I'm not denying there have been changes.
Yeah.
We still don't have the kind of power that white people have. Okay, because we're at it. People see us very differently. There have been articles recently about that whole issue. I don't know if you remember what happened in New York City. I think it was Central Park last week. Was a black man was asked a woman to leash her dog.
Right. Right. And she called the police. Yes, I did read that. Yes.
She says, "I'm going to call the police and report that this black man is abusing her in some way."
Mm-hmm.
Now, she was able to do that because she knows she would be believed, and that we protect white women, and that they are put on a pedestal to a great extent. I'm not saying that they want to be put on a pedestal. I'm just saying that they are, and that we protect. This society goes out of its way to protect white women. They are not to be, in any way harmed, especially not by black men. So, but she was able to do that because she knows how the society reacts. We went through a period a few years back when white women were blaming when they had a problem. I forgot her name, Susan somebody. Anyway, she had her kids in the car with her, and she drowned them. And she claimed that a black man had actually done it. And we've seen that over and over again. We had some cases at SUNY, the university at SUNY, State University of New York, where one white student didn't want her father to know whatever she was doing, and she blamed a black male for entering her room and raping her or something like that. But we and I'm not this. I'm just telling you what I see in terms of reality here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking generally because I don't think all white people think like all black people don't think the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But, there are those who believe that they are superior to black people, and I think that's a very widespread sense among white people who have an advantage because of their color. We have a disadvantage because of our color, because we are thought to be not equal and sometimes not even human. And that's been the case throughout our history in this country and in many other countries as well. So we are really unable sometimes to get beyond that, see that it can change, that you can look at me and see a black woman, but that's all. You don't have to make a judgment about whether I'm equal to you or unequal to you or whatever. You see a black woman who has a history, who has a culture, and you accept that. And that's what people are looking for, in our community, just to be a person and to be accepted as a person, not to be thought of as inferior in all these areas that we've been thought of being inferior. So it's, and sometimes you feel hopeless. But there are things that have happened recently that give us some hope as well. I don't know if you're aware that there have been, as a matter of fact, I saw it just a little while ago, there are police officers who are now feeling that they have to do something different. Some of them are taking the knee, what Kaepernick started, to kneel. Right. They are doing it to show, their empathy. And there was a segment just on the news where an officer was making a speech. He joined the march with these people who were marching against, the person who killed George Floyd. Mm-hmm. Says, I'm with you. I'm not against you. I'm with you. And they said, well, join us, march with us. He said, okay, I will. So those are the kinds of things that can give hope, but we know that, those are individual kinds of things, which we appreciate, but what has to change is we have to have a change that is transformative, that looks at our institutions and say, this is not going to be helpful to all people. Something's wrong with this policy. If we had done this with the war on drugs, we could have seen, and I'm talking about racial impact statements, because that's one of the things we've been asking for. If you're developing a policy, try to estimate what kind of impact it will have if it's going to have a negative impact on certain populations. So if we looked at the war on drugs that way, we could have seen very clearly that there was going to be a differential use of drug laws in our society. That blacks were for cocaine, they were going to get a sentence that was, more than 25 times or whatever it was. I forgot the exact ratio of the powdered cocaine. Mm-hmm. Crack cocaine, you're going to get a much stiffer sentence than if you had the same amount of powdered cocaine, which whites use. We knew that. We knew that whites were using cocaine, powdered cocaine. We knew that there was a lot of crack in black communities. So if we had looked at it, we could have said, yes, this is what this law is going to do. It's going to put more and more black people for longer periods of time in our prisons. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about, racial impact, systemic racism, to look at what we're doing and how it impacts people.
So it seems like your advice is very practical, but also very hard to obtain. This idea,
yeah. Said it was easy.
No. So just starting at the local level, the idea is to get people to be transparent about their police records, to look at policies and try to, ahead of their implementation, understand the way they're going to affect certain communities.
That's right. Anticipate what impact might be. In this country, which was under blacks were under enslavement for almost 400 years. Nobody believed you would get rid of slavery, and it was not easy. Mm-hmm. It took a long time, mm-hmm. but you got to start if you want to finish. So people can do small things. They can commit themselves to trying to understand and put themselves in somebody else's shoes, and treating them differently is not always the right thing to do. And there are things that each of us can do, I think. And hopefully it eventually changes. It's not going to change overnight. I know that. Not going to change within my lifetime, that's for sure. But you got to start a push in order to change it.
Yeah. Well, you yourself, how did you become who you are? All these degrees, all this research, what motivated you? Where did that come from?
Well, see, I go back. I always say that I embody the major forces in this country. First of all was enslavement. My great-grandmother was born enslaved. And that always bothered me. How could you have a country, a society that treat people like animals or some other kind of tool or whatever? You own them. You own their bodies, and you steal their labor. That's just wrong, and I never got over that. I had a grandmother who was a sharecropper, and and I learned about her life and what it was like, and I had a father who was and mother who lived during the Jim Crow South, and their experiences. So as I said, blacks have a collective memory of these things handed down about the treatment in different times. Mm-hmm. I know, firsthand about the incarceration of a lot of our young people, which always bothers me because I can't stand the thought of somebody being caged. I can't even think of it. I have problems with animals being caged. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's not free. I'm writing a book now called We Who Believe in Freedom. And so I've sort of devoted my life to dealing with those ways that we control people and oppress them. And if prison looks like enslavement to me, and So I'm against prisons. I don't think we need to put people behind bars. I don't think we even need to put animals behind bars. But, so that's my perspective that I come with, and that's what I've just devoted all of my life to, doing something that makes me and other people free.